Bolt the door, strap yourselves in, and hold on for dear life. He's back live from the studios of 106.7 My Talker Radio. It's Curtis Wright on the beat.
Monday morning, 7:05, sun's up. Looks like it's going to be another warm day across southeastern North Carolina. We're watching this tropical system that's coming up the coastline, so we'll keep you up to date as much as we hear about the changing conditions. Looks like there's going to be more of a chance for rain further in the week, so keep tuned here on the new 106.7 FM My Talker Radio. Each week, 7 o'clock to 7:30, Thomas Vass joins us to talk about how to find the capital and bring the capital to southeastern North Carolina, to the Cape Fear region, to develop technology companies and develop our economy here. And he's joining us once again today. Don't forget to join us on Facebook. Good morning, sir.
Hey, Curtis, how you doing today?
I'm doing okay. My coffee's hot, and I'm ready to go. Let's talk about today, just that. We're going to start out the introduction to today. And by the way, folks, again, as every week, these particular slides that we're using as a point of reference for our discussions each week, they're on Facebook, and that's Cape Fear Capital Connections. And you can like us there and follow all of Thomas's writings there, and can also link to his website as well. Targeting capital to the important technology clusters in the Cape Fear region. Explain that to folks, technology clusters, because you have talked about this before.
Great, and I will. I just want to, before I begin, I'll talk about these technology clusters. I want to go back and talk about something you were talking about earlier. I know Baker Mitchell, and I've worked with him on a statewide group called North Carolina Charter Schools for Equal Rights. We were trying to change the law. So I want to support what he's doing here in southeastern North Carolina. It ties into everything you were talking about technology, about workforce, about having an attractive environment for starting a company. And I support what they're doing. I know he's a good guy. I know the people that are working for him are excellent people, and they've got the right sentiment and their heart's in the right place for helping children. So I very much support what you're talking about earlier.
You know, I've known him for almost, I guess, 15 years now. Of course, he was a guest on my shows for years. And I am sincere about what I said. This is not political talk show host rhetoric. These are hit jobs, these stories. They are despicable. They're embarrassing. They show clearly that we do not have professional news organizations here in southeastern North Carolina. They're entertainment news organizations, because if they truly were professional journalists, they would show the facts, and the facts are that these schools have higher performance and achievement levels in our public schools. They do it for less dollars. Their facilities are better. Their technology is better. They're better run, higher standards of performance, higher levels of standard of training for the teachers, and higher expectations for the overall staff. And it is just very clear that if you challenge the government bureaucracy, you are going to pay a price. And this is what this is about. It is about supporting ongoing, failed, dysfunctional public institutions in America. And as we're talking here, we're not going to attract technology companies when we have kids that have reading levels and science proficiency levels in the low 40s. You're not going to do it. You're not going to become a technology hub. And there's those in this town that love to talk about technology hubs. And isn't it interesting? They send all their kids to private schools. They don't get involved in the public schools. They bailed out of the public schools, and they think somehow that you can develop that with having the vast amount of children and those coming out of college uneducated.
Well, one thing that we know is that socialists believe that if your intentions are good, that everything else is good. And I want to say Baker's intentions and motivation is in the right place. It's the right thing. He's trying to do the right thing for children. And so when your motivation is right, like his is, then we've got to support him, and that's what I wanted to do.
And you know that we've got to look at achieving and success again. That's what you're doing here. You know, how many decades have we left? We turned over economic and business development to government organizations. The only thing they've been successful at is one thing: taking our money, giving it away, and wasting it. The private sector is what should be the focus of economic and business development. because there are the checks and balances, there are the standards of performance, and there people are held accountable for achieving something.
Right, exactly right. If we're going to do that, we've got to have, and this is something I wanted to talk about in terms of capital markets, we've got to have a business strategy, but it's not a government strategy. It's a private sector strategy, and the private sector strategy is deal mapping, which helps people understand what kind of companies would be successful in the Cape Fear region. Deal creation, which is where you bring your attorneys and your CPAs and your business professionals together to help the company get the product into the marketplace. Deal funding, which is one of the things that I like to talk about, which is capital markets, and it's a whole range of capital markets. And then one of the things that we have to think about is deal exits, which is how the companies either go public or be sold or grow into great, huge companies. So when I talk about the capital markets in Cape Fear, I'm talking about a business strategy, but I'm talking about an entire business strategy that's private sector oriented, not directed by the government.
And you know, I look at number 3 here, deal funding, to find capital to fund commercial ventures. You know, we all know, we who have actually been in business all of our lives, that everybody can have people can have the greatest ideas in the world. The greatest ideas. There's millions and millions and millions of great ideas that have never seen the light of day. And a lot of times, or maybe most of the time, that's because there isn't the capital there that they can access or they can connect with to take that idea, which is viable, into the marketplace and then create a company and create, you know, an organization.
Right, and what we've got to do in the Cape Fear is we've got to create an entire capital market infrastructure so that the citizens here that want to create a company or our existing companies can access capital. It's not a limited part. We've got to create the whole capital market infrastructure. And the other thing that we have to do in terms of creating an infrastructure is to create a social business network, and we've got to use the internet to connect companies to capital. We've got to do social media marketing, we've got to do search engine optimization, and we have to start seeing ourselves in the Cape Fear, in the 7-county region of the Cape Fear. We've got to start seeing ourselves as an integrated economic unit.
Well, you know, we know that because we're a media company that, again, you have to have that. You're always working on 2 sides. One is your idea and going to the market with your idea. The other side is it's no good also unless people know about it. And so you've got to, if you're going to make this capital, if you're going to create this capital market infrastructure, then the folks out there that are working on developing their ideas or the idea then moving to creating a company, they need to know that this exists, and how do I connect with it?
Right, exactly right. And the third component of what I'm talking about is knowing what kind of technology clusters would be important. We've got 5 really good technology clusters from Cape Fear, in the Cape Fear region, from Fayetteville to Wilmington. And we know as economists, we know as regional economists, that there are 9 really important high technology clusters. We've got components of that, and one of the things that we need to do is do everything we know how to do to help those small companies in those technology clusters to grow. So knowing what clusters we have is very important, and I wanted to spend a few minutes today talking about what we've got in the Cape Fear so that the listeners can understand what I'm talking about. In the Cape Fear region, our major clusters that are advanced textiles and apparel, chemicals, biotech, pharmaceuticals. We've got a very interesting machinery, equipment, manufacturing, aeronautics, aviation up in Fayetteville, servicing Fort Bragg and the military. So we've got a huge military technology cluster. And we should be linking what goes on down here in Wilmington to what goes on up there in Fayetteville. So there's very important things. One of the clusters that I wanted to talk about today in particular, just to give listeners a chance to understand that, well, I guess we'll come back after the break. We're going to talk about the chemical and plastics technology cluster here in the Cape Fear. It's one of the most powerful economic engines we can have.
We're here with Thomas Vass, and of course this is Cape Fear Capital Connections. Join us on Facebook, like us there, follow us there. We'll be back. Lots more to talk about here on The Beat.
Wake up, southeastern North Carolina.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning.
Good morning.
Morning. Curtis Wright is on the beat. The new 106.7 My Talker Radio.
We're back live here. Cape Fear Capital Connections with Thomas Vass here on the beat, and we're talking about those technology clusters in the Cape Fear region, and the one he wants to focus on right now is chemicals and plastics technology. Talk to us about that.
We've got a really interesting set of companies down here in Brunswick and New Hanover that are primarily chemical manufacturers, and we've got some parts of the biotech cluster, some parts of the pharmaceutical cluster here. There's another part of this cluster that's up there in Cumberland County. And the idea that we have is both sets could be further integrated. Both sets could be linked up closer if we had a bigger strategy. And one of the things that I wanted to talk about in terms of strategy is that within the chemical and plastics technology cluster, we've got private companies, mostly small, and I wanted to just throw out 4 or 5 names. Here in southern Brunswick, or here in Brunswick, we've got Aerofluid Products, we've got BGF Industries, we've got a company called Technical Coating, we've got a company called Total Lubricants, and then we've got a global company called Walex Products. They make all types of chemicals and resins. They're very high-tech companies. They're private. They don't trade on a public market. And the strategy would be to tie those small private companies to the large global companies. And just to give you an example, mostly up in Fayetteville, we've got Airgas, we've got Ashland Chemicals, we've got BASF, we've got Celanese, we've got DuPont, and then down here in Castle Hayne, we've got a really interesting company called Elementis. One of the things that we should be doing, which is what they're doing in South Carolina, is they're trying in South Carolina to tie their small companies directly to the large companies, to the global companies, to get the products into the global marketplace. Our small companies don't have the resources to do that directly, but they do if they start trading. If they start trading with the big ones, then the income that's generated stays here in the Cape Fear region, and the employment multiplier effect is increased incredibly. So,
well, when you talk about trading, do you mean like setting up certain strategic partnerships for products they might be developing, but they don't have, as you say, the distribution channels globally, that they're going to, then they set up some sort of strategic partnership for the marketing and distribution part of it?
We call that the supply chain, or economists call that inter-industry linkage or inter-industry effects. What we're talking about is both upstream and downstream, both suppliers and the market, getting small companies to have linkages or partners with the big companies. And when that happens, small companies need capital in order to service and supply the big global companies. When small companies service and supply the big companies, the income stays in the region. And when small companies grow, they add an incredible amount of jobs. That's where we get most of our job growth, is through the small companies. And that's what we've got to focus on if we want to dig ourselves out of the hole.
Right now, I mean, with this type of idea, this type of vision or strategy, is there much of this going on? Are you saying there's not much going on? Is that what you're saying here today, that not much of that is going on? Everybody's almost in their own silo doing their own thing.
That's exactly right. The strategy that North Carolina Department of Commerce and our economic development people down here have been focusing on is pretty much, let's do what we can to recruit the large companies. Let's do everything we can do to recruit the next Celanese or the next DuPont or the next Goodrich manufacturer. And that is only, it's a bifurcated policy. It doesn't do what it needs to do. It is actually got the priorities wrong. If we needed to do something, we'd take a look first and foremost at our small companies and then try to target industrial recruitment to what strengthens our small companies. In other words, the priority for North Carolina has got to be on strengthening the industrial clusters that we've got, the technology clusters that we've got. And we could not have done that 3 or 4 years ago, the way that I'm talking about, because accredited investor crowdfunding was not available to us, but now it is, and we need to change the way that we do economic strategy in North Carolina to accommodate that. But that crowdfunding requires the social business networks that I was talking about. It requires something that you and I have talked about called the Cape Fear Regional Capital Exchange, which is the new professional business association of people who care about Cape Fear, care about the economy, have the right motivations and incentives, and want to join a professional group so that we can talk about targeting capital to our North Carolina small companies.
You know, I've come back to this point the last couple of weeks, and in my mind, it's about creating a much more diverse, much more depth, if you will, in our in the economic climate here in southeastern North Carolina, in the Cape Fear region. It's interesting, and I guess if you wait long enough, everything comes back. You know, you're seeing a lot of discussion about that we really don't have enough diversity and depth in the economy in southeastern North Carolina. Well, I can remember back almost 18 years ago, and when this community came together, the largest amount of people and organizations that came together, and we talked about our 20 and 25-year plans. And one of the things when it came to the economy at the top of the list was that we just don't have enough diversity. And I think you're right. I mean, I think that these folks over the years in government, let's get a big company here, let's get a big company here, let's get a big company here. Well, that's great, but if you don't get the big company, you got nothing. Or you bring the big company and then they leave. But then you have nothing. And so you're not really seeding the whole field, if you will,
right,
and then growing the crops, and so to speak, as you could.
It doesn't, that type of lack of diversity doesn't happen just by chance. And I'm going to give you an example from Myrtle Beach. Myrtle Beach has got a little teeny part of the technology cluster, but the people that run the Chamber of Commerce in Myrtle Beach and the other folks down there, they're so dedicated to one economic structure, one kind of approach, and that's tourism and hospitality. And they need to diversify, and it doesn't have to be just one dominant industry or industrial sector in Myrtle Beach. They could do a lot of different things. We can do a lot of different things up here in New Hanover and also all the way up to Cumberland in the 7-county region. We can have a thriving, diverse, dynamic economy based on small companies.
And you being a professional investment advisor, and myself previously being one, that's all we talked about when it came to investments with our clients. Remember, you want to be diversified because the ups and downs of the market and how things will change. They always do, they always will. So that gives you, you know, more tools in your shed. Remember that one? Yeah. Or arrows in your quiver.
Yeah.
You know, we love talking about that. But when it comes to economic and business development, you're right. We go for the elephant,
right,
you know, instead of a herd maybe of you know, another type of animal to get that diversity. It's just strange that way. And I think that's why we're seeing, like you're showing and you're pointing out, that we're not seeing an expansion and growth of the economy, and especially for jobs and companies that we really need.
Right, exactly right. One thing that we like to do at the end of our program, I love talking about technology and technology stocks, and so this week I added 2 new technology stocks to one of my model portfolios. And I mention this because I want our listeners to look at these stocks and start thinking about what technology does. The first one is Aceto, A-C-E-T. It's a chemical company. And the next one is Simpson Manufacturing. It trades under the symbol SSD. And I want our listeners to start looking at these stocks and understanding why publicly traded technology stocks are so important in terms of investing and understanding their contribution to the rest of the economy.
Well, we're out of time today. This is Cape Fear Capital Connections with Thomas Vass. And again, I want to encourage you to please go to our Facebook page. There you can find all of the slides we've been talking about and information. And also on this particular one, you can get the links to Aceto and, is it Simpson, right?
Simpson
SSD.
Manufacturing, SSD.
Manufacturing. And again, you dropped a comment about the Cape Fear Regional Capital Exchange, a professional business association. This is something we're going to work on over the next couple months here in southeastern North Carolina, try to get this off the ground so that we can create that social network that will support the, if you will, business and economic network that is necessary to start developing this capital you know, this capital infrastructure.
Right. Every 3 months, we're going to bring in small companies and have them talk to us about what they're doing and what they do with capital if they raised it.
Thomas Vass, he'll be back with us next Monday, 7 o'clock. Cape Fear Capital Connections. I'm Curtis Wright on the beat. When we get back, lots more to talk about. Stay with us.